Hey guys, what's up, and welcome back to another episode of Homebrewed Evil. Now, before we dive in, just a quick disclaimer: this episode discusses historical events, cultural beliefs, and sensitive topics. It's intended for educational purposes and entertainment purposes, and they're solely based on publicly available research. So today, we will be talking about the 1998 East Java ninja scare. Yes, you heard me right. I said ninja. So this case is based in Indonesia and involves alleged black magic. So before we get into the story, let's set the stage with some background. So, beliefs about witchcraft vary greatly depending on your cultural background and worldview. In some places, witchcraft is very real, practiced for centuries with rituals, spells, and calls to supernatural forces. It's often tied to spiritual world, used for healing, protection, and predicting the future or even seeking revenge. And in some cultures, witches are revered figures who help with everything from farming to family health. In others, they are often, feared and persecuted. From a scientific perspective, there is no solid proof that witches or supernatural powers exist. What people once thought was witchcraft is often explained by natural or psychological phenomena like placebo effect or mass hysteria. But at the end of the day, whether witchcraft is quote unquote real depends on your personal, cultural, or spiritual beliefs. Now, let's connect this to history. It's very similar to what we're talking about today. Witch hunts is essentially what the case is about, right? Witch hunts. Now, witch hunts has been part of human history for centuries, especially between the 15th and 18th centuries, when witchcraft was often seen as a serious threat and tied to hearsay. This led to brutal persecutions, burnings, drownings, stonings, especially during hard times like when there were famines or wars. People would search for scapegoats, and they would often target marginalized groups. Now, there is a lot of research on this if you want to further read up on it, but this legacy is still a very dark chapter that haunts many today, and it's often used as references in a lot of books and movies and shows. Now, let's shift this to Indonesia, where the case takes place. So, witchcraft and mystical practices are deeply woven into the country's cultural fabric. There's a blend of religions and traditions, and Indonesia itself has a very strong and rich history in spiritual practices. So we have actually covered a case very similar to black magic before, but I think it was like too many years ago, like I think 4 or 5 years ago. So that's why the quick little touch on this. So in Indonesia, traditional healers are known as dukun, and they are respected for using rituals and herbal remedies. But there are also practices like ilmu hitam, which means black magic, or santet, which means sorcery, and these are associated with harm and usually blamed for misfortunes like illnesses or crop failures. Historically, accusations of sorcery has been linked to social conflicts and political struggles, often, and they usually use this to explain the unexplainable. Okay, we're done with the background. So now let's get into the case. So this all took place in Banyuwangi, a village just a short ferry ride away from the famous tourist destination Bali. I'm sure you know Bali, okay? Banyuwangi is known as a supernatural hub where sorcery is deeply ingrained in local beliefs. So people there, as mentioned earlier, as soon as there's a misfortune, they always attribute it to black magic. So in the early 1998, a series of mysterious cattle deaths occurred in the village of Kaligondo, and this is in Banyuwangi. It's a village in Banyuwangi. So the unexplained death sparked fear and suspicion among the villagers, who believed that supernatural forces were at play. Now, all of this fear was specifically directed at one man named Mr. Sumarno Adi. He was a martial arts instructor and a practitioner of black magic. He was very well known as the Black Beetle, and he was extremely revered and feared for his supernatural abilities. He loved to show it off, okay, which instilled a lot of fear in people. So he would go around cutting electricity at night markets solely for the purpose of showcasing his powers. So despite efforts from neighbors and religious leaders trying to convince him to stop practicing sorcery, he refused. So finally, with all of the deaths and his blatant showcase of power and fear, tensions reached a boiling point, and Mr. Sumarno was spotted riding a motorcycle taxis, and news of his whereabouts quickly spread, and a mob of over 100 villagers armed with sticks, swords, sharpened bamboo gave him chase, literally chased him down the village. They charged through the White River as they made their way towards the coconut plantation where the Black Beetle, Mr. Sumarno, had taken refuge. Now, witnesses were stunned because Mr. Sumarno allegedly seemed to defy all laws of nature by leaping across rivers as if he was a mythological figure, and his actions were only intensified with the fear and suspicion of the villagers. And when they finally caught him, they attacked him, beat him up, and he was unaffected. He actually, witnesses shared that he was completely unharmed, and this sparked more terror in them, and they eventually stoned him for hours and hours and hours until finally he was dead. And they believed that his death would rid the village of all of the dark powers that they feared, and all of the cattle will stop dying. But this actually brought complete reverse effects, because the killing of the Black Beetle only ignited a wave of fear and paranoia throughout the region. One by one, people were accused of being witches, of practicing black magic, and the attacks became more violent. So fear of black magic practitioners quickly spiraled into mass hysteria. So this was in February, the killing of Black Beetle, and now in August, the killings of suspected sorcerers escalated, and by the end of 1999, over 300 people were killed. Now, this is why this was a time where they called this the sorcerer massacre, because of the large numbers. So Banyuwangi, along with neighboring regions Jember and Malang had become a hotbed of violence. Neighbors, friends, and even families turned on each other. The victims accused of practicing black magic were often ordinary people like farmers or Muslim clerics, and others with no real evidence against them. The killings were brutal. Victims were stabbed, stoned, mutilated, and even burned alive. In some cases, attackers dragged the bodies behind vehicles or hanged them, leaving corpses on public display. So adding to the chaos, this is where the ninjas come in, okay? So masked groups of attackers, referred to as ninjas, emerged. Now, they were said to be dressed in all black. They apparently possessed supernatural abilities, just like ninjas. They leapt between rooftops, vanishing into thin air, and even transforming into cats. They operated under the cover of darkness, and these quote-unquote ninjas would mark homes for attack before disappearing. Some sources say that the ninjas attacked the suspected sorcerers, while others shared that they were actually targeting community leaders such as ulama. So now an ulama is a Muslim scholar who is recognized for having specialist knowledge on Islamic sacred law. Now the residents believed the ninjas were actually supernatural beings, and some thought that they were actually just masked attackers trying to incite fear. As the hysteria spread, entire communities formed night patrols. So they would be armed with makeshift weapons to protect the villages. Because, somewhere along the way, the lines between justice and vengeance quickly blurred. Mobs hunted down and killed the suspected ninjas, and in equally brutal ways. Decapitations and public display of severed heads became very common. And one incident that was shared is of a 17-year-old boy at the time, Samsu Afandi. He was tasked to patrol in one of the villages against the ninja threats. So he said that rumors spread about a Mr. Suharmo, who was an elderly black magic practitioner, and the villagers were incited to kill him. So Samsu, the 17-year-old boy, and 400 villagers stormed to Mr. Suharmo's house. Finding him, he was in bed, lying down with a dagger on each hand. His entire family fled because they knew that the mob was going to come and get him sooner or later. They dragged him outside and beat him and stoned him to death. Samsu, the 17-year-old, was arrested, paraded around town, and labeled as a ninja by the police. And this was really confusing because Samsu was labeled as a ninja, but he was actually patrolling to catch the ninja in the first place. So it was very confusing during this time, and a lot of people that were actually involved in these murders were never actually prosecuted. And by the time the witch hunts subsided in late 1999, over 300 people had been killed across East Java. 184 of those deaths were recorded in Banyuwangi alone. So what happened? How did just a few of these kettle deaths escalate to the brutal murder of over 300 people? Some theories share that the attacks were politically motivated, with vigilantes or militias using the cover of ninja assassins to settle scores, assert control, or eliminate perceived threats. The violence seemed too coordinated to be purely local, with reports of attackers using walkie-talkies, arriving in cars, or speaking unfamiliar dialects. Suggested that, a lot of the people thought that it was an organized effort, not just a spontaneous mass hysteria. And the timing of the attacks also aligns with a very significant political turmoil in Indonesia. So in 1977, the country was actually hit by a severe economic crisis, and this caused a widespread of poverty and social unrest. The financial collapse intensified. In 1999, riots broke out, not just, all over in Jakarta, and the country was struggling under the President Suharto's authoritarian rule. So, he's been and this rule has been in place for over 30 years. So the crisis and the violent protests led to the president's resignation in May of 1998. So this political instability, they say created a atmosphere of fear and distrust, and it was really ripe for manipulation. So some of the theories suggest that it is possible that the powerful figures, want to gain control or eliminate political opponents, might have used hysteria over ninja attacks as cover for their actions. The fear of black magic and, the belief in supernatural figures like the ninjas could have been smokescreen for carrying out politically motivated violence, whether, it could be suppressing old scores, suppressing rival groups, or making a statement against those they saw as a threat. Additionally, and this isn't just for the black magic sorcerers, but remember earlier, and the reason why this theory is so prevalent across all of the researchers is because the masked ninjas didn't just kill the sorcerers, but there were sources that claimed they killed the Muslim ulamas as well, as I shared earlier. And another reason why this theory is so popular is because, there were claims that the authorities were slow to intervene. Some security forces were accused of turning a blind eye to the violence, and there were even claims that certain police and military personnel were complicit in the killings. Again, maybe because of their own political affiliation, or maybe it's just because of the chaotic environment. So when the government finally made the arrests, they rounded up suspects who they believed were responsible for the ninja attacks, but investigations revealed that none of the arrested individuals were actually behind the killings. Just like earlier on, I shared about the 17-year-old boy who was actually part of the patrol to protect the village against the ninjas, but then ended up being paraded around as a ninja. So, yep, that is it, guys. So, obviously the events left lasting scars on the community, creating a climate of fear and distrust, and it lingered for years. But the murders also spurred discussions on regulating sorcery and witchcraft. So finally, in 2022, after 24 years, the Indonesia have finally criminalized black magic practices. And today, in 2025, it's so odd to see how witchcraft has taken in Western media, Western social media, a modern twist, especially on platforms like, TikTok, where witches share tips on casting spells, using crystals, and manifesting their, dream life. So, it's all about empowerment and self-expression now. Well, it's insane to see the two extremes. So, anyways, what do you think? Was this case, do you guys think it was mass hysteria? Do you think it was ignited by fear and just everyone acting in chaos? Do you think that it was political manipulation, or do you think that it was something else entirely? Let me know your thoughts. Bye!